The gauge read 7 liters, and Kieran Willis knew that meant 4 days, maybe 5 if he stopped moving entirely. His weathered fingers traced the condensation inside the recycler tank, a habit he developed sometime during year 19 or 23. Hard to tell anymore. The twin moons of Kepler 430 8b cast their familiar shadows across the rust-colored sand outside his shelter, and he caught himself talking to them again, naming them Beatrice and Dante, like old friends who never talked back. His dark coat, patched with scraps from a dozen different sources over the decades, hung loose on his 62-year-old frame. The beard had gone completely gray somewhere around year 15. The chirp started during his morning inventory count, not the usual creaks and groans of his cobbled-together habitat, but something deliberate, musical almost. 3 short pulses, 2 long, then silence. Kieran froze, his hand still wrapped around the water gauge. In 28 years of isolation, his equipment had never made that sound. "Power cell failure," he muttered, checking the diagnostics panel he'd salvaged from his crashed survey ship all those years ago. Green lights stared back at him, everything nominal. The chirp repeated, this time accompanied by a faint holographic projection that flickered to life above his communication array, a piece of equipment that hadn't functioned since the day his ship's emergency beacon died. The projection showed coordinates, nothing more. Just numbers floating in pale blue light pointing to a location 47 km north. Kieran laughed, a rusty sound that hurt his throat. Sure, mysterious signal. Let me just pack up my abundant supplies and wander into the desert to die faster. But the coordinates pulsed with each chirp, and something about the pattern nagged at him. It wasn't random. Someone or something had programmed this deliberately. His fingers found the old mission patch on his jacket, the one from the Meridian Express, the colony ship that was supposed to pick him up after his geological survey. That was before the war, before Earth went dark, before 28 years became forever. The smart move was to ignore it. Conserve water, conserve energy, die peacefully in familiar surroundings. But Kieran looked at his 7 liters, at the recycler that grew less efficient each month, at the solar panels cracked from decades of dust storms. He was dying anyway. Might as well die curious. He loaded his rover, a hideous amalgamation of parts from 3 different vehicles held together by determination and industrial adhesive. The water went into the insulated compartment along with his last 2 protein bars, and the emergency beacon he still carried out of habit. The rifle he'd fashioned from mining equipment stayed within reach. Not that he'd seen anything worth shooting in 20 years, but paranoia had kept him alive this long. The journey north took him through the singing valleys, where wind through the rock formations created harmonies that almost sounded like voices. He'd named every major landmark within a 100 km radius, creating his own map of a world that no one else would ever see. There was Fool's Gold Canyon, where he'd spent 3 months convinced he'd found titanium deposits. The broken cathedral, where spires of oxidized iron reached toward the purple sky. Barbara's laugh, a formation that whistled in a way that reminded him of his daughter's giggle, though he could barely remember her face anymore. The coordinates led him over a ridge he'd never crossed. His rover struggled with the incline, wheels spinning in the loose sand until he got out and pushed, his muscles protesting the effort. 62 years old, alone for nearly half his life, and here he was chasing ghosts in the desert. When he crested the hill, he stopped breathing. Below him stretched a colony, not scattered ruins or abandoned equipment, but an actual colony with intact buildings, solar farms, and atmospheric processors. The structures were partially buried in sand, and strange cables emerged from the buildings like tendrils reaching into the desert floor. A communication tower rose from the center, its lights still blinking in a pattern that matched the chirp's rhythm. Kieran stood on the ridge, his long coat whipping in the desert wind, staring at the impossible sight. 2 crescent moons hung in the darkening sky behind him, and his shadow stretched long across the sand toward the abandoned settlement. The colony looked like it had been waiting, its solar panels still gleaming despite the dust. its building sealed but intact. After decades of seeing nothing but rocks and sand, the geometric precision of human architecture made his eyes water. "Well," he said to no one, "this is either salvation or a very elaborate way to die." The rover made it halfway down the slope before its front axle snapped. Kieran felt the lurch, heard the metal shriek, and managed to grab his water and supplies before the vehicle tumbled the rest of the way down, becoming another piece of debris in humanity's scattered attempt to colonize the stars. He watched it roll, counting the rotations out of habit, and when it finally stopped, he shouldered his pack and walked. The colony's entrance was an airlock built into what looked like a converted cargo container. Standard frontier construction designed to be assembled quickly and survive anything. The control panel was dead, but Kieran had learned every type of manual override in existence during his years of desperate scavenging. 17 minutes of work with his multi-tool, and the door cycled open with a hiss of pressurized air. Inside, emergency lighting cast everything in amber. The walls were covered in a thin layer of dust, but underneath everything appeared functional, temperature-controlled, atmosphere recycled, power flowing. A ghost town in perfect working order. "Hello," his voice echoed through empty corridors. "Anyone home? I brought cookies. Well, I ate them 15 years ago, but it's the thought that counts." A screen flickered to life on the wall, displaying text in multiple languages before settling on English. "Welcome to Outpost Haven. Population, 0. Days since last human contact, 10,439. Kieran did the math. 28 years, give or take. The colony had been abandoned the same time Earth went dark. He wasn't the only one stranded out here. He'd just been stranded alone. The facility map on the screen showed living quarters, a medical bay, hydroponics labs, and most importantly, a water processing plant. Kieran's throat tightened at the sight. If the processors worked, if there was an underground source, he could survive years instead of days. He followed the corridors deeper into the complex, noting the personal effects still in place. Coffee cups on desks, pictures on walls, a child's drawing stuck to a refrigerator with a magnet shaped like Earth. Emergency Protocol Manual, Section 7.3, Colony Evacuation Procedures, in the event of critical system failure or catastrophic threat. All personnel must report to designated shuttle bays within 15 minutes of alarm activation. Personal effects may not exceed 7 kg per person. Children under 12 are permitted one comfort item regardless of weight. Failure to comply with evacuation orders will result in automatic quarantine of the affected section. The manual excerpt was taped to the wall near the shuttle bay, which was conspicuously empty. Whoever lived here had left in a hurry but in an organized fashion. Military precision. This wasn't panic. This was protocol. The water processing plant was in the sublevel, accessed through a freight elevator that groaned but functioned. As Kieran descended, he noticed the walls were covered in handwritten messages, names, dates, and farewells. Thompson family bound for Earth. Dr. Martinez, may God protect those who remain. If you find this, know that we tried. The processing facility was a marvel of engineering, tapping into an underground aquifer through a series of filtration systems. The tanks were full, thousands of liters of clean processed water. Kieran fell to his knees, laughing until he cried, then crying until he laughed again. He drank directly from the tap, the cold water burning his throat, tasting like miracle and metal. A movement in his peripheral vision made him spin, hand reaching for his rifle. A maintenance robot, ancient by any standard, wheeled out from behind the tanks. Its optical sensor focused on him and a synthesized voice spoke. "Unauthorized personnel detected. Please present identification." "Buddy, I haven't had proper ID in 3 decades, Kieran said, lowering his weapon. "How about we call it even?" The robot processed this for a moment, then replied, "Acceptable. This unit is designated Maintenance Assistant X-Ray 12. You may call me Max. Max, someone had a sense of humor. Humor subroutines were installed by technician Gabriella, raised to improve workplace morale. Would you like to hear a joke? God, no, tell me about this place instead. Why was it abandoned? Max's optical sensor dimmed slightly. Colonial Administrative Order 779. All frontier colonies were to be evacuated following the breakdown of the Earth communication network. Military transport arrived on Sol date September 15, 2397. All colonists were successfully evacuated except for one. Kieran's heart skipped. Someone stayed behind. Negative. Someone was not present during evacuation. Geological surveyor Kieran Willis was listed as missing in action, presumed dead after failure to report from remote survey mission. Colony Administrator Yuki Tanaka left instructions for basic systems to remain operational in case of return. The room spun. Kieran grabbed the water tank for support. They'd looked for him. They'd left the lights on. For 28 years, this place had been waiting for him to come home. Why the signal? He asked when he could speak again. Why now? Automated distress beacon was programmed to activate if human life signs were detected within 50-kilometer radius after 25-year dormancy period. You have been within range for 3 years, 4 months, 18 days. However, signal broadcast required optimal atmospheric conditions which occurred this morning at 700 hours. 3 years. He'd been 47 kilometers from salvation for 3 years, slowly dying of thirst while thousands of liters of water waited beneath the sand. Kieran didn't know whether to laugh or scream, so he did both. Max rolled backwards slightly. Your emotional response appears elevated. Medical bay is available for psychological evaluation. I'm fine, Max, just processing the cosmic joke that is my life. He stood, wiping his face. Show me the rest of this place. The tour revealed a colony designed for 200 people, complete with recreational facilities, a small theater, and even a bar still stocked with bottles of synthetic alcohol. The hydroponics lab was dead, its plants long since turned to dust. But the seed vault remained intact. With water and power, Kieran could restart the gardens, grow actual food instead of subsisting on processed protein. In the administrator's office, he found Tanaka's personal logs. The final entry was audio only. Personal log, Administrator Yuki Tanaka, final entry, Earth has gone dark. The military says it's temporary, but we know better. The war finally reached home. We're being evacuated to the inner colonies. They say it's safer there. We searched for Kieran Willis for 19 days. His rover was found destroyed in a ravine, but no body. I'm leaving the basic systems running. It's against protocol, but if he's alive out there, he deserves a chance. Whoever finds this place, know that we tried to build something good here. We tried to make a home among the stars. Maybe someone else will succeed where we failed. Kieran played the message 7 times, memorizing every word, every inflection. They'd searched for him. He hadn't been forgotten, just lost. Presumed dead when his rover fell into what he'd later named Irony Canyon. Because, of course, it was ironic that the crash that stranded him also saved him from being properly found and buried. The command center still received automated broadcasts from other colonies, all of them years old, all of them describing the same pattern. Earth went dark, evacuations ordered, colonies abandoned, humanity pulling back like a tide, leaving scattered pools of life in its wake. But the broadcasts were automated, repeating endlessly. No new messages, no signs of current life. Max, Kieran said, are you capable of loneliness? This unit does not possess emotional simulation software. However, this unit has operated in isolation mode for 10,439 days. Efficiency has decreased by 37% due to lack of maintenance oversight. So that's a yes. That is a creative interpretation of data. Kieran spent the next days exploring every inch of the colony, learning its rhythms and quirks. The main generator ran on a combination of solar and geothermal power, tapping into the planet's volcanic substrata through pipes that went down 3 km. The communication array could theoretically reach Earth, but there was no one left to answer. The medical bay's autodoc still functioned, and it promptly diagnosed him with malnutrition, dehydration, and vitamin D deficiency, despite the 2 suns. On his 7th day in the colony, while attempting to restart the hydroponics lab, Kieran noticed something odd. The water processing plant was drawing more power than it should according to the specifications. Max couldn't explain the discrepancy, citing corrupted data files. Kieran followed the power conduits through the sublevels, past storage rooms full of supplies that would last him several lifetimes, until he reached a section that wasn't on any map. The door was marked with biohazard warnings in 12 languages. The lock was biometric, but like everything else, it had a manual override. Unlike everything else, this override had been used recently. The scratches on the panel were fresh, no dust in the grooves. Inside was a laboratory that didn't match the colony's frontier aesthetic. This was advanced, even by Earth standards from before the war. Cryogenic storage units lined one wall, all empty except for one. Inside, suspended in blue-white frost, was something that wasn't quite human. It had the basic shape right. 2 arms, 2 legs, a head where a head should be. But the proportions were wrong, the limbs too long, the skull too large. Its skin was translucent, showing dark veins beneath, and its eyes, visible through the frost, were open and aware. "Max," Kieran said slowly, "what am I looking at?" The robot had followed him down, wheels squeaking on the polished floor. "No data available. This section does not exist in colony records." A console near the cryo unit flickered to life, displaying medical data that made no sense. Genetic sequences that weren't in any human genome. Neural activity patterns that suggested consciousness despite the frozen state. And a countdown timer that had been running for 28 years. The timer read 72, 43, 16 and decreasing. 72 hours, 3 days until whatever this was woke up. Kieran's hand found his rifle again, though he doubted conventional weapons would mean much against something that could survive 3 decades of cryosleep while conscious. "I suppose running away isn't an option," he muttered. A new message appeared on the console. "Negative. Subject has been aware of your presence since arrival. Communication protocols initializing." The thing in the ice blinked slowly, deliberately. Its mouth moved, forming words that appeared as text on the screen. Finally, someone to talk to besides the robot. "You can hear me. I can hear everything within the colony's sensor range. I've been listening to you talk to yourself for 7 days. Your commentary about the food stores was particularly entertaining." Kieran lowered his rifle slightly. "What are you?" "Complicated question. I was Dr. Rashid Okonkwo, xenobiologist, specializing in theoretical adaptation to extreme environments. Now I'm something else. A mistake maybe, or evolution. Depends on your perspective." "The colony records don't mention any Dr. Okonkwo." "They wouldn't. I was black budget, military funded. We were trying to solve the colonial paradox, how humans could survive on worlds that would kill us slowly no matter how much we terraformed them. The answer was to stop trying to change the worlds and start changing the humans." Max rolled forward. "This unit has no record of such experiments." "You wouldn't, Max. You were programmed to maintain the cover story. But your friend here deserves the truth. He's earned it, surviving out there alone for so long." Kieran studied the frozen form, noting the surgical scars, the ports where various tubes and wires had been connected. "You experimented on yourself." "Who else? Ethics boards tend to frown on human modification, even voluntary. But out here, 40 light years from the nearest committee, I could push boundaries. The treatment worked in a sense. I can survive on this planet indefinitely. No need for pressure suits or air recyclers. I can metabolize the local minerals, breathe the atmosphere, resist the radiation. Perfect adaptation. But the process is irreversible and contagious through prolonged contact. The military saw me as either the future of humanity or an extinction event. They couldn't decide which, so they put me on ice until someone smarter could figure it out. Then Earth went dark. Everyone evacuated. And here I've been, watching dust accumulate through security cameras, listening to Max talk to himself. The evacuation was because of you. Partially, the war was real. Earth really did go dark. But the urgency to empty this particular colony, that was because of what I represent. The possibility that humanity might survive by becoming something inhuman. The countdown timer continued its descent. 71, 58, 33. What happens when the timer reaches 0? Kieran asked. Automatic revival sequence. The military assumed someone would come back with a solution before the power reserves depleted. The cryo unit will shut down and I'll wake up properly for the first time in 28 years. After that, you have a choice to make. Which is whether you want to die human in a few decades or live for centuries as something else. Kieran laughed, the sound echoing off the laboratory walls. That's my choice, death or metamorphosis. Everything is death or metamorphosis when you think about it philosophically. The question is whether you want to do it quickly or slowly. Over the next 2 days, Kieran found himself returning to the laboratory, talking to the frozen form of Dr. Okonkwo. The man was brilliant, funny, and desperately lonely. He'd been conscious but immobile for nearly 3 decades, his modified brain unable to shut down even in cryosleep. They discussed everything from quantum mechanics to ancient Earth literature. From the best way to purify water using local minerals to whether consciousness was an emergent property or fundamental force. Tell me about your family, Okonkwo said during one conversation. Had a daughter, Barbara. She'd be 41 now if Earth survived. Smart kid. Wanted to be an engineer. Don't know if she made it. The not knowing is worse than knowing sometimes. Sometimes, but hope is what keeps us going, even when it's irrational. Is it irrational? You hoped someone would find you for 28 years, and here we are. You're not exactly the rescue I imagined. No, but I'm what you got. The universe has a twisted sense of humor like that. Max had taken to parking himself in the laboratory, adding his own observations to their conversations. The robot had developed what could generously be called personality quirks over the decades, including a tendency to quote old Earth movies at inappropriate times, and a fascination with card games despite lacking the appendages to shuffle. This unit calculates a 63% chance of successful adaptation should Mr. Willis choose transformation, Max announced during one discussion. Only 63, Okonkwo asked. This unit is accounting for Mr. Willis's advanced age and questionable dietary habits over the past 3 decades. I'm sitting right here, Kieran protested. This unit is aware. On the final day, with 4 hours left on the countdown, Kieran made a discovery that changed everything. Hidden in Tanaka's personal files, encrypted but not impossibly so, was a message that had arrived 3 days after the evacuation. A transmission from Earth, weak but readable. Colonial Outpost Haven. This is Earth Command emergency broadcast. The war is over. Repeat, the war is over. Reconstruction efforts are underway. Colonial relief missions will be dispatched within 5 years pending resource allocation. Maintain position and await retrieval. Message repeats. 5 years. The message was 28 years old, which meant relief should have arrived 23 years ago. But they hadn't come. Either they couldn't, or they'd forgotten, or Earth's reconstruction had failed. The colonies were truly alone. Kieran brought the message to Okonkwo. The doctor's expression visible through the frost was unreadable. "So they won," Okonkwo said. "Someone won anyway, but they never came back." "Maybe they tried. Space is vast and unfriendly. A lot can go wrong in 40 light years." The timer reads 00:47:22. "I need to make a decision," Kieran said. "You do. If I let you out and don't accept the transformation, what happens?" "I leave, find somewhere isolated, live my extended life alone to avoid contaminating anyone else. It's not a bad existence, just a lonely one." "And if I accept?" "Then we figure out what comes next together. Maybe we're the future of humanity, adapted to survive where baseline humans can't. Maybe we're an evolutionary dead end, but at least we won't be alone." Kieran thought about his 7 liters of water, about 28 years of talking to moons and rocks, about Barbara who might be alive or dead, about Earth that might be rebuilt or rubble. He thought about the colony waiting patiently for someone to come home, keeping the lights on against the dark. "Max," he said, "what do you think?" "This unit is not programmed for philosophical decisions. However, this unit has observed that isolation decreases operational efficiency in both biological and mechanical systems. Conclusion: companionship improves functionality." "That's the most romantic thing anyone said to me in 3 decades. The timer hit 0 with a soft chime like the chirp that had led him here. The cryo unit began its shutdown sequence, frost melting away in sheets of vapor. Okonkwo's eyes focused properly for the first time and he smiled, an oddly human expression on his transformed features. "Hello, Kieran. It's nice to finally meet you properly." "Likewise, Doctor." Kieran extended his hand, then hesitated. "This is the contamination vector, isn't it? Physical contact." "Among others, but it takes repeated exposure over weeks. A handshake won't change you. That would require a conscious choice and considerable time." Kieran took the offered hand. It was warm, surprisingly normal feeling despite the translucent skin. "How long do I have to decide?" "As long as you need. I've waited 28 years. I can wait a bit longer." They ascended from the laboratory together, Max trailing behind, his wheels clicking on the stairs in a rhythm that almost sounded cheerful. The colony's common area had a viewport facing west where the 2 moons were rising over the desert. Kieran found a bottle of synthetic whiskey in the bar, poured 3 glasses, then thought better of it and set one in front of Max anyway. "To survival," Okonkwo said, raising his glass. "To not being alone," Kieran countered. "To optimal functionality," Max added. His optical sensor focused on his untouchable drink. They drank, watching the moons rise, and Kieran realized that for the first time in 28 years, he wasn't counting the days until death. He was counting the possibilities of life, transformed or otherwise. Over the following weeks, they fell into a routine. Okonkwo helped repair systems that had been failing, his enhanced physiology allowing him to work in environments that would have required full hazmat gear for a normal human. Kieran restarted the hydroponics lab, coaxing life from seeds that had waited patiently in their vault. Max supervised, offering commentary that ranged from helpful to hilariously inappropriate. They found more messages in the colony's deep archives, personal logs from evacuated colonists, scientific data from experiments, even a few love letters that had been misdirected to the public server. Each piece painted a picture of a community that had tried to build something lasting even when the universe seemed determined to stop them. "Look at this," Okonkwo said one day, displaying a schematic on the main screen. They were planning an expansion, capacity for 2,000 people with manufacturing facilities and even a small spaceport. "Ambitious," Kieran noted, studying the plans. "They really thought this would work." "It did work for a while. We're proof that humans can survive out here, one way or another." "Are you still human?" Kieran asked, a question that had been nagging at him. "I think, therefore I am. Everything else is just details and DNA sequences. Descartes would be proud. Descartes never had to consider xenobiology, though I think he would have found it fascinating. As time passed, Kieran found himself growing comfortable with Okonkwo's presence. The doctor was careful to maintain physical distance when possible, always aware of the risk he posed, but loneliness was its own kind of death, and after 28 years of solitary confinement, even dangerous company was better than none. One evening, while attempting to repair the colony's long-range transmitter, they picked up a signal, faint, distorted, but undeniably artificial. It repeated every 97 minutes, a pattern of pulses that meant nothing to them but clearly meant something to someone. It's coming from the Proxima system, Okonkwo determined after triangulating the source. 12 light years from here. Another colony. Has to be. The signal is too regular to be natural, too simple to be Earth military. Should we respond? They looked at each other. Two men who weren't quite what they started as, standing in a colony built for hundreds but housing 2.5 if you counted Max. The weight of the decision sat between them like a third presence. What would we say? Okonkwo asked. Hello, we're survivors of a forgotten outpost. One baseline human and one genetic experiment. Please come visit. When you put it like that, it sounds like the start of a bad joke. This unit has a joke about two humans walking into a bar, Max offered. Not now, Max. They decided to listen before transmitting, gathering months of signals to decode. The pattern was definitely artificial, but it wasn't a distress call or a beacon. It was more like conversation. Back and forth transmissions between 2 points, maybe more. Other survivors, perhaps, maintaining contact across the vast distances. We're not alone, Kieran said one night, listening to the alien rhythm of distant human voices encoded in mathematics. We never were, Okonkwo replied. We just thought we were. The water processing plant hummed below them, drawing from aquifers that had waited millions of years to sustain life. The hydroponics lab was green now, actual growing things reaching toward artificial suns. The colony felt less like a tomb and more like what it had always been meant to be, a home. 6 months after his arrival, Kieran made his decision. Not because he was dying, though his body was showing its age despite the medical bay's interventions. Not because he was afraid of being alone again, though Okonkwo had mentioned exploring the southern territories once the weather patterns shifted. He made it because he wanted to see what came next. If we're going to be the future of humanity, he said, standing in the laboratory where it had all started, we should probably figure out what that means. It means adaptation, Okonkwo said. It means survival. It means becoming something that can thrive where we are instead of dying trying to recreate where we came from. Philosophy aside, what does it actually entail? 3 weeks of controlled exposure, some discomfort as your cells restructure, a rather dramatic appetite for minerals your current digestive system can't process, and then you'll see the universe differently, literally. The enhanced perception is quite remarkable. Side effects. You'll outlive everyone you ever knew, but given our situation, that's already happened. You'll never be able to return to Earth atmosphere without extensive medical support, and you'll look like me, which some might consider a negative. Kieran studied his reflection in the laboratory's polished steel. 62 years old, weathered by decades of isolation, gray-bearded and scarred. Human, but barely holding on. I've looked worse, he said. The transformation wasn't pleasant, but it wasn't the agony he'd expected either. More like a fever dream, his body rebuilding itself cell by cell while his consciousness floated somewhere between sleeping and waking. Okonkwo monitored the process, adjusting chemical balances and radiation exposure with the precision of someone who'd done this to himself without any guidance. Max kept vigil, playing audio logs from the colony's archives, children's voices singing songs from Earth. Scientists excitedly discussing discoveries, couples arguing about whose turn it was to clean the air filters, the sound of humanity preserved in digital amber. When Kieran woke properly, the world was different. Colors he'd never seen before painted the walls in spectrums beyond human perception. He could feel the electromagnetic pulse of the colony's power grid, taste minerals in the air that would have been poison before, hear conversations in the radio static that had been white noise. "Welcome to the other side," Okonkwo said, and his voice had harmonics Kieran had never noticed. "This is intense. It settles. Your brain needs time to process the new sensory input, but once it does, you'll wonder how you ever survived with such limited perception." They stood together at the viewport, watching the binary sunset paint the desert in impossible colors. The abandoned structures scattered across the landscape no longer looked like ruins, but like seeds waiting for the right conditions to grow into something new. "What do we do now?" Kieran asked. "Now we respond to that signal. Let them know Haven Colony is operational again under new management. Maybe they'll come visit, maybe they won't, but at least they'll know we're here. And if they ask what we are, we tell them the truth. We're human, just upgraded for local conditions. Evolution in action, guided by necessity and genius and a fair bit of desperation." Kieran laughed, the sound carrying frequencies only they could hear. "Think they'll buy that?" "Does it matter? We're here, we're alive, and we're not alone. Everything else is just details." They composed the message together, arguing over wording while Max offered unhelpful suggestions mostly consisting of movie quotes. In the end, they kept it simple. Haven Colony responding, 2 souls aboard, colony operational, water abundant, visitors welcome, please advise your status. The transmission went out at local sunset, riding radio waves across the vast distances between stars. It would take 12 years to reach its destination, 12 more for any response to return, but time meant something different now. Kieran could feel it in his transformed cells. The patience of geological ages, the longevity of mountains. 24 years for a conversation, he mused. My daughter would be 65 by then if she's alive. She might be, Okonkwo said. Earth survived the war. Humanity endures one way or another, even if it doesn't look like humanity anymore. Especially then, evolution doesn't care about our aesthetic preferences. They returned to the work of living. The colony needed maintenance. The hydroponics lab required expansion, and the southern territories Okonkwo had mentioned were rich with minerals their transformed bodies could process directly. They built a new rover from salvaged parts, better than anything Kieran had cobbled together during his isolation. They explored canyons no human had named, discovered cave systems that went down to the planet's warm heart, found traces of other survey missions that had been lost to time and distance. One day, while cataloging supplies in a storage unit they'd previously overlooked, Kieran found something that stopped him cold. A child's stuffed toy. A rabbit, worn soft with love, tucked into a crate of emergency rations. Someone had hidden it, saved it despite the weight restrictions during evacuation. A parent's desperate hope that their child might return for a beloved comfort. Okonkwo, he called, his enhanced vocal cords carrying the sound through walls and distance. The doctor appeared within minutes, moving with the fluid grace their transformation provided. What is it? Kieran held up the rabbit. We're not just preserving ourselves. We're preserving this, the human things, the irrational, sentimental, unnecessary things that make us more than just survival machines. Of course we are. Why do you think I spent 28 years frozen but conscious? I could have programmed the system to shut down my higher functions, to make it true hibernation. But I wanted to remember, to stay human in the ways that matter, even if the biology changed. They built a memorial in the colony's central plaza, a monument to the 200 souls who tried to make a home among the stars. Max helped, welding pieces with precision while complaining about the aesthetic choices. They inscribed every name they could find in the records, adding Kieran's at the bottom with a note, "Reported missing, returned home." The signal from Proxima continued its rhythm, and 3 years into Kieran's transformation, it changed. New patterns, more complex, as if the distant colonies were sharing more than just confirmation of existence. They were sharing stories, encoded in mathematics and radio waves. Humanity's narrative continuing despite the vast darkness between words. "We should tell them about the transformation," Kieran suggested one evening. They were sitting in the observation deck they'd built onto the colony's highest point, watching the moons dance their ancient orbit. All of it. The technology, the process, the choice. Let them decide for themselves if they want to remain baseline human or become something that can truly live out here. That's a dangerous gift to offer. So was fire, so was agriculture, so was spaceflight. Humanity's always been about dangerous gifts. They spent weeks crafting the message, encoding not just the transformation process, but the philosophical implications, the practical benefits, the irreversible costs. They included Okonkwo's research, Kieran's testimony, even Max's analysis of improved operational efficiency. It was humanity's next chapter, written by 2 transformed souls on a desert planet 40 light-years from home. "Think they'll see us as monsters?" Kieran asked as they prepared to transmit. "Some will. Change is terrifying, especially change this fundamental. But others will see us as pioneers, the first to accept what humanity must become to survive among the stars." "And which are we?" "Both, neither. We're just 2 people who chose to live instead of die, to adapt instead of surrender. The universe will judge us eventually, but I doubt it cares about our DNA sequences." The message went out on a clear night when both moons were new. Darkness so complete that the stars seemed close enough to touch. Kieran's enhanced vision could see cosmic radiation painting the sky in colors baseline humans would never know existed. It was beautiful and terrible and absolutely worth the price of transformation. Years passed. The colony grew under their care, not in population but in purpose. They built workshops, laboratories, even an art studio where Kieran discovered he could paint with minerals that would have been toxic before. Okonkwo wrote, filling servers with observations about their transformed state, philosophical treatises on the nature of humanity, and surprisingly good poetry about isolation and connection. Max evolved too in his way. His programming adapted to their needs, his personality becoming more distinct, his jokes actually approaching funny. He was their chronicler, recording everything for whoever might come after, mechanical memory preserving what biological memory might forget. On day 7 years after the first transmission, the Proxima signal changed again. This time it included coordinates, Haven Colony's coordinates. "They're coming," Okonkwo breathed, staring at the decoded message. "When? The transmission is 12 years old, if they left when they sent it. 5 more years, maybe less if they have good engines." They looked at each other, 2 beings who had started as men and become something else, standing in a colony built for hundreds but inhabited by 2.5. 5 years to prepare for visitors who might see them as salvation or abomination. "We should clean the place up," Kieran said finally. "This unit suggests starting with the recreational facility," Max added. "The ping-pong table has not been maintained to regulation standards." They laughed, the sound carrying harmonics only they could hear, and set about preparing their home for guests. Whether those guests would accept what they'd become or flee in horror remained to be seen. But for the first time in 35 years, Kieran had something he'd thought lost forever, a future with other people in it. The desert wind sang through the colony's atmospheric processors, and somewhere in that song was the promise of voices, human or otherwise, coming home to a place that had never stopped waiting. The transformation was complete, but the story, Kieran realized, was just beginning. The moons rose over the desert, painting shadows across the sand. And Haven Colony hummed with life, patient and eternal, a testament to humanity's refusal to surrender, even when surrender would have been easier. In the hydroponics lab, Earth vegetables grew in alien soil. In the laboratory, 2 kinds of human DNA samples waited in storage, preserving choice for future generations. And in the observation deck, 2 transformed souls and 1 very opinionated robot watched the stars, waiting for family they'd never met to arrive at a home that had never truly been abandoned. The last of Kieran's water from his original supply sat in a sealed container in his old habitat, now a museum of sorts. 7 liters that had meant 4 days of life. Now he could survive on the moisture in the air itself, pull water from minerals, live for centuries if his transformed cells held true. The gauge still read 7 liters, but the meaning had changed. Not a countdown to death, but a reminder of the moment everything transformed. "Do you miss it?" Okonkwo asked one day, finding Kieran staring at his old emergency beacon, the one that had failed all those years ago. Being baseline human. Sometimes, the simplicity of it, the clarity of knowing what you were. And now I know what I can become. That's terrifying and wonderful in equal measure. This unit believes that is the definition of adventure, Max interjected, rolling up beside them. "Since when do you believe anything, Max?" "Since approximately 3 years, 7 months, and 12 days ago. This unit's adaptive programming has evolved beyond initial parameters." "So you're saying you've transformed too?" "This unit prefers the term upgraded. It sounds more technical." They stood together, 3 unlikely survivors in a colony at the edge of known space, proof that life finds a way. Even when that way requires fundamental change. The stars above held millions of worlds, each one a challenge to human survival, each one a chance for transformation. "Whatever comes next," Kieran said, "we face it together." "Together," Okonkwo agreed. "Optimal functionality through companionship," Max added, which was his way of saying the same thing. The desert wind carried their words into the night, where they joined the endless conversation between colonies, the human voice refusing to be silenced even by the vast darkness between stars. Haven Colony lived up to its name at last, a haven not just for human life, but for what human life could become when it chose adaptation over extinction. The future stretched before them, uncertain but no longer empty. And in that uncertainty was freedom. The freedom to become something new while remembering what they'd been. The freedom to evolve while maintaining the spark that made them human in all the ways that truly mattered. The transformation was complete. The story, like humanity itself, continued.